and we will start to see the U.S. dollar falling in relation to those other currencies, and that will really kick this gold rally into a whole new gear.
Before we get started, this isn't financial advice. Know your risk tolerance, do your own due diligence, and speak to a financial advisor. Today's guest needs no introduction for anyone paying attention to the global markets or the precious metals markets. Joining me is Peter Schiff, forecaster, investor, chief economist at Euro Pacific Asset Management, and one of the most outspoken voices on gold, inflation, and the failures of many central bank policies. He's been backing gold long before anything in the mainstream media came out, and let's just say that time has been proving him right, and few bring the same level of conviction that he does. And with gold hitting yet another all-time high just today, now above $2,900 an ounce, I don't think there's a better time to get his take. Today, we'll delve into what's really behind gold's rise, where it could be heading for the remainder of the year, and how Trump could further shake up the global markets and U.S. fiscal policy. So, Peter, welcome.
Thanks for having me on, Aaron. Nice to be on your program.
I like to get a little bit of background and find out kind of the motivation behind your life's work. So before we dive into the volatility of today and the opportunities, I want to go back to the beginning for you. You spent decades warning about fiat currency and advocating for sound money. But was there a specific moment growing up that made you see the system differently, or kind of lit a fire under you to get behind precious metals and motivate you into the career path that you've been on for decades now?
I've had an understanding of these issues pretty much my entire life. The way I was taught by my father. Yeah, I've had my economic understanding and my suspicions with respect to government and the Fed since as long as I can remember. Obviously, the biggest mistakes that I saw the Fed make first was the Greenspan response to the 1987 stock market crash, which I found problematic. But then his response to the policies that helped facilitate the NASDAQ.com bubble, and then the policies that inflated the housing bubble were of particular concern to me at the time that those mistakes were being made. And I was quite vocal about it at the time.
I don't think anything's really changed from a central banking perspective from, let's say, even going back to the Great Recession.
No. Yeah, in fact, just before you and I started talking, I was watching Jerome Powell speak before the Senate Banking Committee. But, the Fed just repeats its mistakes over and over. It's hard for me to understand to what degree the Federal Reserve knows they're making mistakes. I always have a hard time trying to discern whether or not they're dishonest or ignorant. But it's one or the other.
Or maybe it's just, predecessors who've been running the Fed for decades. They went down this path after 1971 and they can't get off it. Maybe it's just a matter of we have no other options.
They made their bet a long time ago. And that this is where we are. But yeah, once you go down this path, it's very difficult to get off it, because you have to make an admission of the mistakes. But rather than do that, they just compound them by, repeating them.
Obviously gold's at an all-time high. You've been banging the drums for years on gold, and it's obviously performed well. Deficits are massive, and many central banks are have been selling dollars for gold, yet somehow the dollar is still standing strong relative to its peers, at least. Why is that?
Yeah, well, it just shows you how big the problems are overseas as well. And so kind of the dollar de facto is where everybody turns when they're worried about their own currency. The fact that the problems here may actually be greater than they are over there don't seem to matter much, at least for now. So America is the beneficiary of the fact that everybody else is screwing up too.
Right.
but the U.S. isn't going to be able to ride that gravy train indefinitely. And there's already lots of signs that that's ending. Gold nearing 3,000 is probably the most significant, because gold is where foreign central banks are turning when they unload their dollars. Mm-hmm. And yes, so the dollar has maintained its relative value with respect to the euro and other currencies. It's actually gained a bit, but it continues to fall in real terms measured in gold. But I think that the time will come, and it won't be too far away, where the dollar really starts to fall, not only in terms of gold, but in terms of these other currencies. And that's when the situation is going to get a whole lot more problematic for the United States.
Without a viable competitor, and I don't really think it's gold from a currency perspective, without a viable competitor, how does the dollar get dethroned as a world reserve currency? Or maybe it doesn't. What is your thought on that?
I would disagree with your position on gold. I think gold is a viable competitor to the dollar. I think that central banks have a choice as to what asset they'd prefer to hold as a reserve to back up their own currency. And I think that gold, hands down, is a better place for central banks to put their trust than the U.S. dollar. Because, the foreign central banks don't use the dollars really as a payment mechanism. They're holding in reserves. Now, as far as, what other currency private companies could choose to trade in, I think gold also works a lot better than the dollar. And I think, making and facilitating payments in gold is relatively simple. And so that can be an alternative. So you don't have to say, well, there's the euro or the yen, they don't look so good, so the dollar is going to win by default. I think all those currencies could lose against gold. And I think that's what's going to happen. I think countries are going to move away from the U.S. dollar because its future purchasing power is going to be in doubt. And, the bigger the debts grow, the greater the likelihood of inflation, and much higher than the inflation rates that we're experiencing now. And so there's not a lot of certainty as to what the dollar is going to buy in the future. And so it's not really viable. And I think that we take advantage of the dollar status to try to exert, our will on other countries. Mm-hmm. And I don't think they want to be put in that position where they're beholden to the whims of U.S. presidents if they find something about their policy that they disagree with, that they could use the dollar and their reliance on the dollar as a weapon against them. And I don't think that's very appealing.
I agree with that. And I am a gold bug. I guess the big holdup for me with gold, you say that it could be relatively easy as a medium of exchange. What do you mean by that? Like how could gold ever become let's say a currency of sorts used in trade? How would that ever?
Well, first of all, it was used in trade for thousands of years, and then we invented currency to substitute for gold. But what gave the currency its value was the gold that was backing it up. So you and I could trade with each other in gold without any of us having to physically hold the gold in our hands, because we could use a paper representation of gold. Well, now we could use a virtual representation of gold. So with the computer, with the internet, blockchain, it's much easier now for parties to transact in gold without actually having to have physical custody themselves of the gold. And so they could do that. Most of the transactions in dollars, the people don't have physical bills in their hands. They're dealing with bank deposits. The dollars are custodied at some bank. Well, you could just as easily do that with gold.
Now, you talk about digital currencies. I know your take on Bitcoin. But don't you think Bitcoin could also serve that purpose, given on the high level that it has a finite supply? Like, don't you think Bitcoin could be that currency?
Well, I've never bought into the finite supply argument of Bitcoin because it's a finite supply of something of which there is an infinite supply of alternatives. Gold is in finite supply because it's scarce in the earth, but gold has properties that are unique to it. And yes, there are other metals, and in some cases they can substitute for gold, but in many cases they can't. But even there is a finite supply of other metals that you could use in replace of gold if gold were too expensive. But when it comes to Bitcoin, yeah, there's a finite supply of Bitcoin that has been, manufactured by man, right? Not like Bitcoin, like gold, where the finite supply is a fact of nature, and we can't do anything about it. We decided arbitrarily, somebody decided to limit the supply of Bitcoin. It's not that there's some other factor other than a self-imposed limit. But there is no limit to the number of cryptos that can be created. I mean, Donald Trump created one. He created two. There's Trump coin. There's Melania coin. There's a limited supply of those. And you can transfer your Trump coin around. Just like Bitcoin. Now people say, well, that's a meme coin. Well, as far as I'm concerned, Bitcoin is a meme coin. I mean, that's basically why it has value. It's because of perception. It's because of confidence. Well, if people start to have confidence in Trump coin, well, why is that any, not as viable as Bitcoin? So I don't think Bitcoin would work because I don't think there's any real way that you can have confidence in its future value, because you have no way of knowing whether or not the bubble will continue for any particular number of years. At any moment, the whole thing can collapse. And so you can't really central banks can't hold a bunch of Bitcoin and have any certainty as to what those Bitcoin may or may not be worth in the market. And you certainly can't hold Bitcoin as any kind of viable reserve. Look at what happened when Trump announced tariffs that first time, that weekend, and you had like the Mexican peso down 3%, the Canadian dollar, currencies were getting clobbered. Bitcoin that night was down like 7%, way more than any currency. Gold was actually up a little bit. So if the Mexican government wanted to prop up the value of the peso, it could have sold some of its gold reserves to do that. It could have sold some of its reserves in Japanese yen, which, were higher that night. Or even other currencies. The Swiss franc was down, but not down that much. And if it held U.S. dollars, it could have sold those. But if it held the reserves of Bitcoin, it couldn't have done anything, because the Bitcoin was down more than the peso, way more. And if they'd have tried to sell Bitcoin to defend the peso, Bitcoin would have crashed even more. So I don't see how it can function as anything. It doesn't really work as a medium of exchange in that it's volatile, but it's also slow and expensive. There are much better ways. If I wanted to buy something from you, you would want me to pay you in all sorts of ways other than Bitcoin. Bitcoin would be the most inconvenient, expensive, slowest way that you and I could transact.
So you see it as a speculative asset, nothing more. It's not going to be a medium of exchange.
No, I mean, to the extent that it's used today, it's more as barter. I mean, yeah, there could be some individuals that are accumulating Bitcoin that may accept Bitcoin as payment for something because they want the Bitcoin. But to me, that's more of a barter. And I look at Bitcoin more as a collectible than anything. I mean, people have Bitcoin collections, and that's as long as there's people that want to collect Bitcoins, then there's a market for them. But, at some point, I think people will get tired of collecting Bitcoin. I think the main motivation for collecting them is getting rich. There are a lot of other things you can collect that I think you'll have a lot more enjoyment out of the items that you're collecting, more personal satisfaction and stuff like that. I don't think Bitcoin collections are very exciting. But what excites people about a collection of Bitcoins is this prospect that it's going to make them rich. Because Bitcoin is going to be 1 million. It's going to be 10 million. It's going to be whatever, the crazy stuff that Michael Saylor likes to say. But when people have a more realistic outlook on what those Bitcoin may or may not be worth, I think the incentive to collect them will go away.
Don't you think that the incentive to, let's call it collecting Bitcoin, though, is a symptom of the, decades-long loose monetary policy, money printing?
Oh, yeah. I mean, for some people, sure. But it's not, what's wrong with gold? Gold, if you're really worried about inflation and central banks debasing their currency, we got gold for that. We already have a real money alternative. And to me, that's a lot more stable, a lot more reliable than Bitcoin, which, as I said, could just end up being a fad. Just a passing thing. Sure, yeah, it's been around for a while, but I think what's really given it its new lease on life was Wall Street deciding that it could make a buck off of the foolishness of the general public by launching these Bitcoin ETFs. And also, like Michael Saylor, Wall Street is making a fortune off of Michael Saylor every time he sells these convertible preferreds or these, stock as the ATM into the market. Wall Street is just making a huge commission off of this guy. He's like their best customer. He's constantly selling stocks and paying commissions to Wall Street. And they're making a bunch of money on these Bitcoin ETFs. They don't have to do any research, any due diligence. They don't need any analysts. There's nothing. They just buy thin air, and they charge a custody fee. So Wall Street's making a buck off of it. That's that's generally how those guys operate. When the ducks quack, they feed them, right? They don't try to tell the ducks that this food is no good. They just give the ducks what they want, as long as they can make money selling it to them. And now, the Bitcoin people have corrupted the political system. They've used their gains, from the crypto pyramid to bribe politicians to try to introduce legislation to use the power of government to buy Bitcoin and just, adding on to the pyramid, but now using the power of government, which I think is the most ironic because Bitcoin was originally started by a libertarian, viewpoint, free market, alternative to government. And now Bitcoin is completely dependent on government. Government is what's really driving it now. Will government start buying Bitcoin? And that's what people are buying Bitcoin for. They're trying to front run the government, and they're hoping for a big government bailout of the Bitcoin.
I think I understand. So there's obviously a lot of mainstream analysts covering Bitcoin. There's institutions that are giving it an allocation. There's even sovereign wealth that's doing it as well. But
yeah, they're all talking their books now. Yeah, they have all got money to make off of Bitcoin and
right.
Off of crypto companies. Of course,
I got it. So they're incentivized. That's why we're seeing the mainstream analyst coverage. But if you look at gold, it's often dismissed, and people will say, "Oh, it's just central banks buying it. It's just a cyclical trend or whatever it may be." But I think you've argued that it's something deeper than that. What is it? Just I just want to jump back to gold, but is it just what's driving gold specifically? Is it just the central bank buying, or is there more to the story?
Well, the central banks are a big part of it, and I'm sure there's other demand, mainly coming from the East. So I'm sure the Chinese public, India, countries like that, they're still buying gold. Americans have been selling gold. They sold a lot of gold last year. They sold a lot of gold stocks. I mean, they've been selling into the rally the entire time. Gold's up about 50%, and they've just been sell.
Why do you think that is? Because they need money?
Well, in some cases, it's because they need the money. In other cases, it's because they'd rather use the money to buy tech stocks or to buy Bitcoin or MicroStrategy or something. So they're either gambling with the money or they're using the money to buy food. It depends on their circumstances.
Yeah.
But there isn't a lot of investor demand or demand for gold, in the general public. They don't understand gold, and so they're not buying it. And if they own it, they tend to be selling it. Now, of course, that's not true with everybody. I mean, there are plenty of people who still believe in gold and still buy it in the United States. And I think more and more people are going to start embracing it again. Unfortunately, the price is going to be a lot higher by the time they do that. I don't know that 3,000 is going to be enough.
Yeah.
Maybe 5,000 will, who knows? But whatever that point is, we're going to find out because gold's going to keep going up. Maybe it's going to take a big crash in Bitcoin to kind of wake people up to the difference.
Mm-hmm.
But or maybe a big drop in the dollar relative to the other fiat currencies that are out there. I mean, gold's gone up to almost 3,000 in an environment where we've had a strong dollar, which is normally a headwind for gold.
Yeah.
And I think the strong dollar has been a headwind because gold would be a lot higher than 3,000 if the dollar was weak against other currencies. I mean, it's weak in terms of what it will buy you. But it on a relative basis, the pound or, the Canadian dollar, whatever, have been even weaker. But that will turn around and we will start to see the U.S. dollar falling in relation to those other currencies. And that will really kick this gold rally into a whole new gear.
See, it's interesting because I own gold. I own the gold miners. I own speculative plays in the gold space. And I talk with a lot of my colleagues. And I think, since November, December of 23, we would say, oh, we need $2,500 an ounce. And then, the mainstream, the retail market will start to take notice. And then, it goes to 2,500, nothing changes. It's still kind of subdued interest in it from the broader markets. Now, I kind of think it probably needs $4,000 or $5,000 an ounce before people actually start paying attention.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. And again, the mainstream media dismisses the rise. They try to come up with some reasons that it's going up so that we don't have to read anything into it or get worried. Why do
they do that? Why are they so dismissive of gold? It's almost like it's a faux pas to talk about.
Well, the financial media wants to, push the narrative that everything is great, that the stock market is great, the bond market, the economy. So, gold is saying that that's not the case. So they don't want to acknowledge that warning. So they dismiss it or they try to come up with another rationale for why gold is rising. Oh, it's all the geopolitical uncertainty,
Right,
so don't worry about it. It's not rising because the Fed has got monetary policy wrong or because there's a debt crisis coming or inflation is going to rear its head in a bigger way, right? No, don't worry about any of that. And of course, Wall Street doesn't really make a lot of money in gold. They make money when they're managing your stock portfolio or you're trading stocks and they're charging you commissions and stuff like that, or they're lending you money against your stocks so you could buy more stocks and they could charge you interest. So they don't like it when people just buy gold and take their money away from that system and just put gold bars, in a safe, right? They don't make any money off of that. They don't like it. I mean, I make a little money off of both. I mean, I sell gold. I mean, we have a company, Schiff Gold, and people buy gold and silver from me. I make a lot more money when they give me their money to manage at Europe Pacific Asset Management. But that doesn't stop me from telling them to go buy gold too and buy silver. I think people should have gold and silver, but not with everything. And I mean, I manage portfolios. Now, some of the portfolios we manage are mining stocks, so we do that too. And I think the upside potential there is enormous. Now, I've thought that for quite some time, and I would have been better off in general just buying physical gold. Physical gold's gone up 10x since I started buying mining stocks 20 years ago. I got a few mining stocks that have gone up 10x, but most of them haven't even come close to that. And on average, if you look at all the gold stocks I bought, had I just bought, the best ones, the ones that did the best, but I mean, in hindsight, I didn't know that. I was, being more diversified. But I would have been better off just buying physical gold.
Yeah, the miners have definitely underperformed. The miners have definitely underperformed. But I think that also speaks to gold's value because mining gold is not an easy business. You can go out and find
it's a hard business. But, when the analysts that cover these gold stocks just don't believe in the rally, and when you look at their earnings reports, like I was just looking at one the other day for Barrick, the assumption for the gold price that the analysts use to try to make a forecast on Barrick's earnings, which obviously would be something that would help determine what you should pay for Barrick, what the share price should be. It's based on an earnings outlook. Gold is at $2,900 an ounce, yet their assumption for 2025 is $2,650. But what gets worse, if you go out to 2027 and you look at what their assumption is for the gold price, it's $2,400. So
really?
They assume that the price just turns around and falls for the next 3 years.
Right.
They ignore the fact that it's just gone up so much, and they just assume that it's going to go back down. But they assume that the cost of mining is going to keep going up.
Yeah.
So it's just that the gold that they're mining. So if that's your outlook, if you think mining is going to get more expensive, but gold is going to become cheaper, you're not going to be recommending these gold stocks. But I
That's
think
a great
if you took
point.
a more realistic outlook, where is gold going to be in 2027? Maybe 4,000. I mean, that, to me, that's a better guesstimate than 2,400.
Right.
And so if you start putting those kind of numbers into the price, and yes, I think the cost of mining will also go up, but not as proportionate to the rise in the price of gold. So these stocks are very inexpensive. I think they're really trading at single-digit multiples right now.
It's been frustrating. You mentioned Barrick. Like, I've owned Barrick for a few years, and I think gold's up whatever it is 50% in the last 18 months or so, and I think Barrick's in the last 2 years is probably up 10% or less.
Look,
but I think it speaks.
Barrick is lower than it was 20 years ago. It's lower.
Yeah.
It's not higher. Lower.
Crazy.
Now it's paid dividends. It's paid dividends over that time period, so you could have reinvested those dividends, and but the stock price, and that's because they've done tremendous acquisitions. I mean, one of the reasons that I have a lot of Barrick myself, it's not my biggest position, but most of the Barrick I own, I didn't buy. I owned the companies that Barrick bought. That's how I got the stock.
Oh, nice.
I probably had at least half a dozen stocks that were bought by Barrick and gave me stock in Barrick in exchange.
Explorers or producers?
No, producers, real companies that were producing. I mean, I remember the first one. My first was Homestake Mining. Barrick bought Homestake Mining. Remember that?
Yeah.
But I owned like Plutonic, Pasminco. These were companies in Australia.
Nice.
That I forget. I mean, some of these stocks that own. I mean, a lot of my stocks got bought out by Barrick. They got bought out by Newmont. They got bought by even Agnico Eagle or Silver Wheaton. I forget. Yeah. I mean, I have these positions in the larger companies, but a lot of the stock I got because I had smaller companies. So that's helped me. Like I've made money in Barrick because I made money in the stocks that Barrick bought. Right? That's real, because I got premiums every time they bought a company, right? The shares that I had, I got a premium to where those shares were trading when the company got acquired. Now, how would I have done? Would I have done better if Barrick never bought all those stocks and I still had those companies? It's hard to say. Where I'd be. But I remember, like, I was just talking, I did a podcast last night looking at Australia. I used to own, in Australia, I used to own Lihir Mining. I used to own Newcrest Mining. They're gone. They got bought out, I was like, found one. I still own Golden Star, which was one that I still own, which had made a 52-week high. But I think the consolidation in this sector is going to really pick up.
I
agree. I think that what the bigger companies are going to be doing with their cash flow, is buying out the smaller companies and then buying some of the exploration companies to the extent that they've actually got, a viable, property that they're developing because they're going to want to get more reserves to replace what they're mining. But rather than spend money to go out and find new deposits and develop new deposits, I think it'll be a much better use of their money to just buy out existing companies. But of course, also, they're going to be buying back their own stock, which is one of the reasons that the gold supply is going to be very constrained for many, many years. Because when the price of gold goes way up, the gold companies are not going to go out and look for more gold. They're just going to consolidate and buy up each other. That's going to be cheaper than going out and exploring and paying all that CapEx to try to, find more gold. So it's just going to be the gold that already exists, kind of getting bought up.
I agree with that. And the lag time is to go out and make a discovery and bring it through the development stage, the permitting phase, to get it into production. That's 10, 15 years, right?
Yeah,
so
and that's gonna be true for like copper and nickel or zinc. All these metals, are going to be in the same situation. There's going to be a lot more demand, and there's just not going to be a commensurate increase in supply to kind of mitigate that price.
Okay, so this is kind of on point, but we have Trump now. He's promising, deficit cuts, stronger U.S. manufacturing, booming economy, and all this. But we've heard it all kind of before, right? Do you see a strengthening economy under Trump? I kind of get. I mean, I'm Canadian, so I'm directly concerned about these tariffs. But forget about Canada. I even look at it from the U.S.'s perspective. Do you see the tariffs kind of igniting troubles in the U.S. economy, or perhaps a decline in the dollar? And then what does that do for the broader markets? Like I look at Trump as like, this is some of the most disruptive policy we've seen in 50 years. And I'm wondering what you
we've seen a lot of destructive policies, so I don't know that tariffs are any worse. The government needs to raise more revenue, so tariffs are one way of doing it, right? I mean, we have huge deficits. I think it's misleading to try to tell the public that they're not going to pay the tariffs, that Canada is going to pay them or China is going to pay them. No, they're taxes on Americans. Americans are going to pay the tariffs. But Americans have to pay one way or another. So, that's the bad news, because, we have too much government. Now, I would much rather see big cuts to government spending than higher taxes, but we got to have something. Now, they are trying to cut some spending. They're going after waste, fraud, and abuse, which, of course, there's a lot of that, but that's par for the course in government. I mean, there's going to be waste, fraud, abuse in every government everywhere in the world. And the bigger the government, the more of it there's going to be. I mean, we've got the biggest government, so we probably have the most. But, they're not going to get rid of all of it. I mean, I hope they get rid of a good chunk of it. But that's not going to solve the spending problem. It'll mitigate it a little. But the real spending problem is in the stuff that they won't touch. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all these other income support programs, the veterans benefits, the defense budget, the interest on the debt. 90% of the budget is kind of like sacrosanct. So they're just playing around with a small portion of it. And even if they eliminated it entirely, it wouldn't solve the problem. And meanwhile, the tax cuts are going to add to the debt. Are they going to stimulate the economy? Not really. In fact, most of them will just stimulate consumption. If you think that's the economy, you cut people's taxes on their Social Security. These people, they're not going to save that money for their old age. They're already in their old age. They're going to spend it. They're gonna enjoy that extra income that they don't pay taxes on. The waiters and waitresses and bartenders, to the extent that they have higher income, they're gonna spend it. They're gonna go buy stuff. So it's all.
Well, why do you say that consumption? Why do you say that consumption isn't the economy? That pretty much is the U.S. economy, though, isn't it? It's consumer spending.
That's the problem. I mean, consumption is not supposed to be the engine. It's supposed to be the caboose. Right. What drives the economy is production. And of course, if you produce something, it goes without saying that you get to consume it. That's the reward for production, is consumption. We've got the cart before the horse. So if Americans are just going to go spend more stuff, that's not real economy. Where's the stuff going to come from? We have to import it. We have to run larger trade deficits for Americans to spend more. If we don't produce more. And spending doesn't create production, right? Demand doesn't create supply. Supply creates demand. That's where it comes from. Desire is always there. People want all kinds of things, but real demand is a function of supply. Because if there's nothing there, there's nothing to buy. Right?
So what's the logic?
What doesn't exist.
what's the logic behind Trump's tariffs then? That he's gonna onshore manufacturing and U.S. is gonna go alone? What's the motive behind it?
Some of the logic behind tariffs is to collect the revenue for the government, just like any other tax.
Yeah.
I mean, the government taxes cigarettes, even though in theory, it would be better if everybody stopped smoking. But if everybody stopped smoking, the government would lose a lot of tax revenue. So the government doesn't want you to stop smoking. They want you to keep smoking and paying the taxes.
Right.
And then we also subsidize tobacco farmers to grow tobacco. At the same time that we're running ads to convince people not to smoke, we give tobacco farmers money to grow tobacco. So the government has all kinds of contradictory policies. So, part of it is to raise revenue. But yes, I mean, the president is trying to help the steel companies in the U.S. And if there's tariffs, then the steel companies can charge higher prices for their steel and they can pay their workers higher wages. And so that's what he's trying to do. But what he's ignoring is the companies that are negatively impacted by those tariffs that end up having to spend more money for steel. And so their products are less competitive and maybe they have to give pay cuts to their workers or, whatever. So there's always going to be winners and losers. You just have to follow the politics. It's who is greasing the palms of the government to get the things that benefit them. Usually it's the public that is the bag holder because the general public doesn't have a lobbying group, right? It's always the special interests that are able to organize and pay off the politicians. And so it's that narrow interest that they pursue, even if they have to sacrifice the broader interests of the rest of the country to do it.
So overall, is Trump, what do you think? Trump good or bad for American economy and capital markets?
Well, I mean, I think it's good. I mean, because, Harris would have been worse. I mean, that's
for sure.
It's like I talk about all the bad things that Trump is doing, but Harris would have done. They would have done even more bad things.
Yeah,
there are some good things that Trump is doing. It's very likely that there hardly would have been any good things that Harris would have done, given my limited choices.
Yeah,
in the situation. Yeah, Trump isn't as bad, and there's some really good things that Trump is going to do that I don't want to discount. The importance of some of those good things. But is everything he does good? No, it's not.
Fair. Okay, so I don't want to be all kind of doom and gloom. I appreciate the upside. Of course, we need to be clear-eyed on the challenges ahead. But outside of gold, because I know you talk about gold and fiat currencies a lot, what gets you excited about the capital markets and the economy? Where do you see opportunity outside of gold or silver for investors right now?
Yeah, well, I still think the emerging markets are very attractive investment opportunities. I am looking forward to, I think, a post-U.S. dollar reserve currency world where the world doesn't have the type of economic imbalances that exist today. I think it's going to be a much more prosperous world. I think it's the opposite of what Trump believes. I don't believe that the world takes advantage of America. I think America takes advantage of the world to the detriment of the world. And so I think that to the extent that the world moves beyond this, there's a lot of additional prosperity that's coming. And I think the investment opportunities there are tremendous. And I think the valuations in a lot of these assets don't reflect that. So we have a lot of money invested in the emerging market companies. I have an emerging market fund at Europe Pacific Asset Management. People can buy that no load at any of the discount brokers, or you can have an account with us. You can get information on the website at europac.com. And I think value stocks, there's a lot of good companies that are relatively good investment values, good inflation hedges that have nothing to do with precious metals or resources. That I own.
When you say emerging markets, Peter, that's obviously it can be a broad spectrum. What are you talking about specifically? Like Vietnam, or are you talking about the classic?
Yeah,
China?
I mean Southeast Asia, is probably the most exciting region, and that would include China. A lot of people are negative on China. I'm not. So, but there's opportunities in South America. There's opportunities in the Middle East. I mean, hopefully there may be some in Africa. I'm not really involved there, but there's probably a lot of stuff going on in that continent. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, doesn't China scare you though with the? I mean,
governments always scare me. You don't think the U.S. government? The U.S. government is pretty scary too. It's a little less scary with Trump, but yeah, government. I mean, you should always fear government, right? I mean, that's but it's unfortunate. There's a famous quote: "When the people fear the government, it's tyranny. When the government fears the people, you have freedom." And we need to turn the tables so that the government is afraid of us, not the other way around. They've gotten so big. I mean, that's why they're able to steal from us with impunity. That's why these government agencies are able to get away with all this waste, fraud, and abuse, because they haven't feared the public. And the Constitution of the United States was written to protect the people from the government. The Chinese Communist government, I mean...
just seems like it puts a ceiling on growth. It just seems like
it
does. Particularly just the way he governs. Like I take a look at like a Jack Ma, for example. Okay, so there's this innovative entrepreneur, builds up this highly successful company. Then he starts speaking his mind a little bit, not even anything remotely close to what American entrepreneurs do. And he basically gets put into exile. He no longer is seen. And who's running the company that he built so successfully, right?
Yeah,
like, to me, that's scary.
I know, but the United States government targets people for their political views as well, and targets them for litigation, prosecution, regulation. I mean, we have our own version of that. So yeah, I mean, it's not ideal situation. I mean, communist China is not ideal, but neither is any democracy. I mean, that's a flaw, and in many cases, democracy can be one of the worst and most tyrannical forms of government. I mean, the majority can be very cruel to the minority. So the key is just to protect the minority from the majority. Now, sometimes it's better to do that with one person. Maybe a king would be a better protector of the rights of people than a democracy. I mean, our founding fathers tried it with a republic, and we're still a republic. I mean, in theory. I mean, and there are a lot of things that are Republican about our government, but unfortunately, we have too much democracy in the government, far more than the framers, allowed for. But they knew that it was a risk that democracy could rear its head over time, and that's exactly what happened. But China's made a lot of strides. I mean, this is not your grandfather's Communist Party. There's a lot of capitalism in communist China. There's a lot of entrepreneurship. I mean, it's not, Mao Zedong, it's not, the Chinese government commanding and controlling the entire economy. You have a real market-based economy in China. And in many ways, their economy is more capitalistic than the American economy. Not in all ways, but in many ways.
Give me an example.
Well, just if you're a small businessman and you want to set up a little business in China, it's actually going to be easier as far as the permitting and the regulations and the taxes and the other requirements. It's actually a little easier, and maybe a lot easier in most cases, to get a business off the ground and to operate that business profitably. So a young man in China who is hardworking and motivated probably has a better chance of succeeding than his counterparty here in the United States.
Well, Peter, this has been a great conversation, very wide-reaching. I really appreciate your time, man. Where can our viewers find you online and follow more of your work as well? Tell us a bit about Euro Pacific.
Yeah, so Euro Pacific Asset Management is my company. We're based out here in Puerto Rico, where I live, and I've lived here for about 8 years. The company's been here for almost 11 now. But we manage a portfolio of mutual funds, and we manage separately managed accounts for individual investors. You can get the information on the funds and the separately managed accounts on the website at europac.com. I talk to our advisors, and they'll walk you through how you can incorporate our strategies into your investment portfolio. If you don't have silver and gold, or you have some and you don't have enough, we sell physical gold through Schiff Gold. You can go to the website, schiffgold.com. I have a new venture, Schiff Sovereign, with James Hickman, who was formerly with Sovereign Man. And now the company is called Schiff Sovereign. We've got a free newsletter. We've got a premium newsletter. Some other things that we do. You can go to schiffsovereign.com and sign up for the free letter. Have a free trial for some of the paid content and premium content. But we put out a lot of good, usable information for people. If you just want to follow me on social media, I do a podcast at Schiff Radio. Also on my YouTube channel, the Peter Schiff show. You can listen to the Peter Schiff show either on my YouTube channel. I do it live now, so there's video, and you can be there for the live show.
Where do you find all the time in the day for all this? Like it
doesn't take that much time. I did an X Spaces last night. Took 2.5 hours.
I was listening. Yeah.
On that, so I did that. But you can follow me on social media. Follow me on X. I'm finally got over 1 million. I now over 1.1 million. But I still got a long way to go to catch up with some of these crypto people who have.
Yeah. They like to come at you a lot, eh? I've heard a few back and forth, but they sure like to go at you and debate you. But you hold your own, man. We'll include all the links in the description. Peter, thanks again for your time. I really, really appreciate our conversation today.
All right, Aaron, take care. Have a great rest of the week.